Welcome to Becoming the GC, the podcast that dives deep into the journeys of general counsels and chief legal officers, uncovering the insights and strategies that help define their success. Hosted by Joe Schul, founder of InStride Counsel Academy. We share real-life stories and practical advice from successful GCs, guiding you on your journey to the top. Tune in and discover what it takes to become the exceptional legal leader your organization needs.
Joe Schul here, and let me introduce this episode by saying I thoroughly enjoyed having Stephen Chu on the show for our very first episode. The words that come to my mind when I think of Stephen is, that guy is going somewhere, and I can't wait to see how his career progresses. He's already accomplished a lot, but I don't know, I see him as perhaps a GC someday. Stay with me to the end where I'll share my key takeaways from the episode focused on how this might help someone listening who aspires to be a GC someday, or who is already a GC but wants to take their career to the next level. The show is sponsored by InStride Counsel Academy, where in-house counsel go to elevate their careers while enhancing their lives. And also by General Counsel West, a law firm that supports GCs of healthcare companies and their teams with an inside counsel mindset. Without further ado, I bring you Stephen Chu. Today's guest is Stephen Chu. He's the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer at InStride, where he oversees legal, human resources, IT information security, and facilities. InStride is a human capital management company that delivers workforce education solutions in partnership with top academic institutions, and it's headquartered in El Segundo, California. I'm thrilled to welcome Stephen to the show.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Oh, it's great to have you here. That's a lot of responsibilities. That was a long list. How did that happen?
It didn't start out that way, and it definitely is an interesting kind of transformation of when I first started InStride. So when I first started InStride, I was doing just legal and HR, which is two very, very large jobs by themselves. But as time went on, I think the CEO and the board wanted to add more to my plate. And so try to give me more responsibility and more, along my own journey. And so they added IT information security and they added facilities. And so the facilities is a small part. We're a pretty remote distributed company, but we still have an office, two offices that we still pay for. So those need management as well.
I kind of like it. I mean, I often thought there would be benefits to companies who have more of a chief administrative officer. So there aren't, the CEO and the CFO aren't listening to a cacophony of voices on things, but a unified voice that sort of synthesized those areas that you've talked about. So I haven't seen it a lot, but I think there's some wisdom to it, and that's a great job to have. So congratulations.
Yeah, it works for us. We're a smaller company too. We're only about 200 employees. I can imagine a company that's much larger. There's just more going on in legal and HR. And I think it's much more difficult maybe for one person to kind of consolidate across all of those various functions. But I think it works well for us. When I first took the job, though, I'll tell you, Joe, that I went into the interview process saying, I'm legal and HR. At some point, I'm going to give up one of these things, right? And the answer was yes. Like at some point in our growth journey, that they were going to split the role. But it's been 2.5 years now, and we still have not split it. And I don't think the split's coming anytime soon. I think the big boss CEO likes it this way.
Right. Well, to the contrary, instead of splitting it, they've added more things. But you must have great support because the GC job is a full-time job. Head of human resources, all of these are full-time jobs, so that you can't possibly be doing them all.
That's exactly right. And there's absolutely no way I can do them all. Every single function has what I would call an amazing lieutenant that can effectively, Joe, run the entire department themselves, right? And in some ways, they don't even need me. I often make that joke to other executives that you don't need me. You can just work with so-and-so who's in charge of legal or so in charge of HR. And I think that the only way I succeed in my job, and this has been true since the day I walked in the door, the only way I can succeed is by having a number two in each function that can do the entire job and is the central point of failure. Like they know everything that's going on from a legal perspective. I'm not keeping anything from them, and they can do the job on their own. And every one of my functions has that capability.
That's great. Take me back in time. You went to law school at Columbia, far away
Like
from
someone else,
home,
like someone else I know.
right? We both did, years apart, but far away from home because you were born in Canada, I understand, but you grew up in Downey, and so you went to the East Coast. You went to law school. Did you know what a general counsel did at that time?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. Did you know what a general counsel did when you
I
left
don't think
Columbia?
so. I've often thought of when did I first like it become in my conscious awareness what a general counsel is, and that I wanted to be one. I know it was during law school, because I had an uncle who, well, like a great uncle, somebody distant relative who was a judge, and I told him that, and I think he was disappointed.
That that might come out in a little bit of my story too. I think that as you will soon learn, and we will maybe soon discover in the next several minutes here, I like to fly by the seat of my pants, Joe. I feel like I don't exactly know what I'm going to be doing at any moment in time, and so when I got to Columbia Law School, I don't think I knew what job I was going to have when I left Columbia Law School. And I think when you go to a place like Columbia, especially when you finish your first year, everyone talks about something called OCI, right? Everyone's just doing OCI, and I think you just get on the bandwagon. I don't know if there's maybe I don't have any of my own independent thought, but since everyone else was talking about OCI, I was like, all right, I guess I got to do OCI. And that's
On
when
campus interviewing.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you for telling the audience what that is. And so everyone goes through on-campus interviewing, and you basically go through this audition process or interview process with a bunch of firms, and you end up picking one of the firms, and that's your 2L summer job, right? That's basically how it works. And from then on, that was kind of like the path that I was on. It was, in some ways, I chose it, but it was kind of the only path that I saw, because that's the path that everyone else did. It's a good thing I didn't see a bunch of monkeys jump off a bridge, because I might have done that too.
Right. And to be fair, the job that you went to was at Cravath, which, for people probably at many law schools, especially Columbia, that's like the plum job to get.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I went there, Joe, too, was because I interviewed with a lot of other firms. Not that we need to name any of them, but I did my Cravath interview, and it was the only one that I had like butterflies in my stomach. I went into it, I was like, I gotta nail this interview. People talk about this firm like it's a big deal. I want to see if I can actually get a job here. And lo and behold, I got a job there. So I think it was like, okay, if that's how much anxiety or nervousness went into it, then this might be a job that I actually care about. So that's how I ended up at Cravath. And then once you end up at Cravath, it's kind of like you have two paths: litigation or corporate transactional. And I was like, I don't know if I'm a litigator. So I went down the corporate path, and that's how I became a corporate lawyer. And I think at that point, I would tell you, Joe, I still don't think I knew what a general counsel was, even then.
Right on. So tell me how that outside counsel work evolved into moving inside. What was the inflection point that caused you to want to go inside?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity that arises, and I don't know if you're going to ask me this about later about how a in-house lawyer can kind of move through and get different opportunities. I think when I was at the law firm, and again, maybe this is just because I'm lazy and I only can look 2 feet in front of me, but I thought that the law firm partner gig was the gig. Like you get to a law firm, everything's kind of set out for you. Everyone kind of makes the same amount of money. Everyone's kind of on the same path and amount of time it takes to make partner. At that time, being partner was what I thought was the pinnacle of the legal profession. Maybe your judge family member thought that being a judge was the pinnacle of the legal profession. But at that time, I thought it was law firm partner. And I was at the time I was at Gibson Dunn, and I was in the finance practice, and I ended up working on a deal where I had a partner, and then I was doing the debt side of the transaction, and then there was an equity portion of the transaction that was led by another mid-level associate and another partner. And so we're kind of like a team, 2 partners, 2 associates, and we're working on this transaction together. It was somewhat complicated. And at that time, the Gibson Dunn partner was kind of nearing the end of his career, and he was on the golf course a lot. So I ended up doing a lot of that deal on my own.
Was this still in New York?
No, this is in LA.
Okay. So you'd come out back to LA. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was working on this deal, law firm, my partner was he was still involved, but he was kind of, doing other things. And I was working with this other associate who was actually a year ahead of me. And we did the transaction together. It was a complicated 2 months. I actually didn't even know who he was before we started working on the deal together. But we closed the deal. Everything was fine. And then he immediately went in-house at CBRE, the commercial real estate services firm. He then moved in-house. And then a year later, so like a year later, he is at CBRE, and the deputy general counsel of corporate just kind of just like they seem to be friends or know each other. And he says, "Hey, when you were at Gibson," he goes, "This guy, when you were at Gibson, did you meet anyone that was really good? Do you think I should talk to them? Do you think I could, hire them to be on my corporate team?" And this guy, who I only worked on this one transaction with, was like, "Hey, you got to talk to Stephen. He might be worth talking to." And that was a year after he had already left. So and a year after this transaction. And so that's when Stephen Ballas, who I think who's a now a law firm partner at Sidley Austin, he was the deputy general counsel of corporate at CBR, reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's start to get to know each other." And that's when the interview process for me going in-house began.
And then how quick from there did you go in-house?
So we started I would say a courtship process that took 6 months, I'd say. We probably had lunch together 3 or 4 times in downtown LA. And I think he knew he was going to fire his existing senior counsel, but he wasn't sure. And so he was kind of just like beginning that process. And then when he ultimately did move on from his lawyer, he ended up opening a full interview search process. So I actually interviewed for the job, despite having known Stephen for 4 or 5 months at that point, and then interviewed against, according to him, 2 or 3 people, and then ultimately did get the job. So I'd say 6. So the moment Stephen reached out to me, I'd say it was about 5 or 6 months later that I ended up taking the job. And I will tell you, Joe, I don't even know if I knew I was going in-house at the time, because at this time I was still probably thought I wanted to be a law firm partner. But I went through maybe 13 or 14 interviews at CBRE, like just, over maybe a month period, just meeting different people. I was so exhausted by the end of it. I was like, if I don't take this job, I would have just wasted a month of my time. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And so I went to go to CBRE.
And when you got there, was it what you expected, or were there surprises?
There were surprises. I think that when you're at the law firm, you have a little bit more time to think. There's just less meetings. And I think that when you go in-house, the thing that was shell-shock to me, and I tell this to a lot of young lawyers, especially those that I hire and those that are coming straight out of the law firm, the biggest shell-shock experience to me, I'm curious, Joe, if you felt this too, is just when you're in-house at a company, there are just a lot of meetings. The way that things get done is through meetings. And I think at a law firm, it's just not as meeting heavy, because you're just not meeting, at least I wasn't meeting with clients 9 to 5 every day. Maybe I'd have 1 or 2 calls with a client, but that was it. And the rest of the time I can actually do work. When you're at an in-house job, you've got to do your work in between all of those meetings that are taking place during the day. Some of your work is happening during those meetings, but as lawyers, we still have to read.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I always emphasize with people on my team and in my private coaching clients is how important it is to carve out time to get work done, so you're not saturated with meetings and not having 30-minute pockets to do thinking work, because you could add those up together and they're not going to amount to much.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. The meetings. Oh my goodness.
But I mean, what I'm trying to think, that was the biggest shell shock moment that I often think back on. I think the cool thing about going in-house, especially to a really large public company like CBRE, is just the opportunities. It's less true with the company that I have now, but when you're a one lawyer in a 100, 150, 200 person legal department, there's a lot of room for you to do different things. And I really appreciated that when I got to CBRE. I got to do some really cool stuff that was not just M&A, public company securities, corporate governance. I got to do other things. I went to Asia for a year. That was an opportunity that I think I would never have had, had I gone to a company that just didn't have the global reach or the global operations that CBRE does.
Sure. In that, it sounds like you got such a variety of experiences that set you up well for a GC role.
I think it was the beginning. I only did 2 in-house gigs before becoming GC. So I did the CBRE role. And then when Stephen became general counsel of another public company in LA, he made me his deputy GC. So so after about 2 years at CBRE, he moved on and became GC, and then he brought me over with him. And so that's when I was probably even more broad based, as you said. Then I wasn't just doing M&A, corporate governance, and securities. I was doing IP, employment. Now I was doing it all. Managing a team of about 18. I was actually doing commercial work. That was the first time I had ever done commercial work actually at a company, because when I was at CBRE, there was an entire commercial team that handled that part of the business. I was mainly just doing the corporate work. And so when I got to the next company with Stephen, I was able to do everything. We did, I was basically his number two, managing everything. And that's what helped me really, do everything, and learning from him as GC. That was prepped me to become GC myself.
Right. Well, when you talked earlier about the importance of having a number two, I was going to ask you, but I figured we'd get to it if you had been the number two exactly like that for someone else. And it sounds like you had. And that gives you broad exposure to everything, right?
That's right. That's right.
Wow. So how long from being number two in that role until you got an opportunity to be the GC? And how did that come about?
So it was about 3 years. And that question's a great question, because it's a great part of the story. So we had an intellectual property firm that we were working with, based in Westlake Village, by the way. And we were working with them since the beginning. And I think we had like maybe 10 different IP firms that we were working with. But ultimately, we kind of consolidated them. We decided we were working with too many. We had a lot of IP work going on. And so we basically consolidated down to this one firm. And I got to know the law firm partner there really, really well. And that was probably 2 or 3 years we were working together. And then I think he found out through, whatever, that I was interested in becoming a GC one day. And I was actually at the airport flying to the Bay Area for a GC interview. And it was like Friday at like 6:00 in the morning. And I think I did end up doing a call with him at like 6 in the morning. He's like, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm at the airport on the way to a GC interview." And he goes, "I didn't know you wanted to be GC." He's like, "Maybe I've got something for you." And I think, as you know, Joe, a lot of law firm partners, as a way to create value for in-house lawyers, they'll say, "Oh, Joe, if you ever need a GC gig, I'll find it for you. I'll find one that's good for you." And I think sometimes they mean it, and sometimes they don't, right? They don't actually have anything. And so, I think I've met enough law firm partners that have that kind of maybe in their back pocket, and maybe they don't. So this particular IP law firm partner said, "Yeah, I got something," but I didn't hear from him for maybe 6 months. But he actually did have something. He did.
You've got me so curious, because you said Westlake Village was where I'm headquartered. Who are we talking about?
We're talking about Jonathan Pierce at SoCal IP, who works with Steve Serba.
Yeah. Great. Okay, good. I know Steve well. Great.
Yeah. Steve's great. Steve did for that particular public company that Steve and I were at. Steve and Jonathan both did a couple big litigation cases for us, some patent infringement cases. So I got to see Steve and Jonathan in action. They're both great. But it goes back to the story, and I don't know if this is going to be a recurring theme among some of your other guests. And I hope this isn't cliche, because the last thing I want to be is cliche. But it pays to be a nice person. It pays to just be nice to everyone around you. Don't treat your outside law firm providers or law firm service providers like crap, because they might actually get you your next thing. And so Jonathan and we became very good friends during that period of time, spent time together. And when he knew I was looking for a GC job, and he knew kind of my personality, he knew what I could do, he was doing a patent infringement case for a company called Zwift. And Zwift was probably at that time 3 years old. Pretty young, never had a GC before. They had an outside GC, pretty well-known one in the LA area, that, a fractional GC that did many, many different things. But Jonathan thought I was a good fit for the CEO, who he had been working with a lot for that patent infringement case, and said, "Hey, you got to meet him." And so how I got the GC job, so Jonathan introduced me to Eric, who is the CEO of Zwift. Eric and I met on a Friday. I met him at the Zwift offices in Long Beach for about an hour. On that weekend, Eric texted me and said, "Hey, I'm in Manhattan Beach," where I was living at the time, and said, "There's going to be a bike race." Zwift is kind of a cycling company. "There's going to be a bike race in Manhattan Beach. Come out." We watched the bike race together for about an hour. Then we went to a coffee shop and sat for about 2 hours, just chatting about things. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to introduce you to my head of people on Wednesday." So I met the head of people on Wednesday. I think I met 2 other executives on Thursday and I had an offer that following Friday.
Wow.
So within a week, that's kind of, and that's just startup world probably. I mean, Zwift was pretty small at the time. It was pre-Series B. So had not yet closed its Series B, less than 50 million revenue. And that's when the first, it was not the first GC offer that I got, but it was the first GC offer that I thought was extremely interesting. And I took it. And again, Joe, probably not knowing exactly what startup world was, because when I know now what a pre-Series B company was or is, I don't think I knew that when I took the GC job at Zwift at the time. I'll tell you that. I'll be completely honest.
So what did you do? So you were the first in-house lawyer. You're the GC. What did you start with there?
Oh God. There were three things that I was hired to do, which is why I think that Zwift wanted a GC at the time. And I think I only ended up doing one of these three things, or maybe two and a half, or one and a half. So the three things that Eric wanted me to do, one was he thought we were going to buy a company. We were going to do some large M&A transaction. That never happened. The second thing that he wanted me to do was to basically close our fund, get ready to close our Series B, which did happen, but I think it took a few months. It wasn't like I showed up and we were like in the middle of Series B and I was getting ready to close the transaction. It was, I think he had just maybe started the road show. So I think it was several months later that we ended up closing Series B, but we ended up doing that too. So I would say that number 2 box I will check. And the third box, which didn't ultimately happen either, was he wanted to form a professional cycling league, like a professional cycling league on the Zwift platform. And I will tell you that I probably spent 80% of my time in the first several months working on that. So I almost felt like a sports lawyer. I felt like I think I was interviewing Proskauer and Covington to see if they could work and help me basically build a sports league on the Zwift platform. It was extremely exciting. Eric and I were working pretty much side by side on this thing together. But the league, we're trying to work with the existing professional cycling league to try to the on the road in person cycling league, not the esports league that we wanted to set up. So we were trying to get the esports and the real this is like trying to get the real life NFL with Madden, Xbox Sports League, like somehow combined together, and we're somehow going to get the actual NFL athletes playing in Madden. That's the concept of it. And it never took off. We just couldn't get this professional cycling league on board with what we wanted to do. And it fell apart, and we never got it done. But I will say, for the first 6 months, that was what I was tasked to do as GC.
So a lot of things you hadn't done before, either in the outside counsel role or even in the prior in-house roles, the number 2 role. So what kind of skills did you have to acquire, and how'd you go about that to be successful?
It's a good point. There are many, many things I do not know, Joe. I feel like I don't know a lot of things. And so I think a lot of part of what a GC does is trying to figure it out and trying to access the right experts, the right people, the right tools to make sure that you can sound half educated and make the right business decision, right business recommendation for either the CEO or the board. I think that it requires a couple of things. One is you've got to be willing to talk to everyone at the company who actually does know the answer. If you're going to work at some company and it has some ARR or annual recurring revenue, there's going to be some subject matter expert or supposed subject matter expert at the company. And you've got to be willing to do the diligence, sit down with them and learn from them. You can't show up as a GC and think you know everything, because that's just impossible, especially if it's a company or an industry that you've just never been a part of. And for me anyway, every single company I've joined has been a company that I had no idea what was going on, including my current one, by the way, which is an education technology company. Did not know anything about ed tech before I started here. And you've just got to be willing to go in and tell people that you're going to invest and take the time to learn from others, especially that are already at the company. I do think a GC's job is to know the business as well as the CEO does. I really do, because you can't identify risk. You can't look around corners if you don't know how the business works. If you're just a, contract attorney, then that's all you're going to be. You don't know how to strategically provide advice because you don't know how to think about the business at a higher level. Anyway, spend time with the business. That's number 1. Number 2 is I think you've got to be able to problem solve, look at a problem and say, okay, who can help me figure this out? And that might be other GCs in the space. That might be obviously the easy one is to go to outside counsel and find a law firm partner that can figure it out. And so I think those are kind of the two main areas. There might be consultants or contractors that have done it before, like a PwC or like a Big Four. There might be those types of specialist service providers that are maybe experts in that particular issue. And I think those are what I would call the third party help type places that you need to go. And the last thing I would say is, is Google. Do the research, at least start doing the research yourself and at least figure out where you can go and get a little educated yourself. And then you can access the two buckets that I first mentioned of, okay, now you know which experts to go to. That's probably
and what
the advice
questions to ask, right? Once you've educated yourself a bit, you can ask a lot smarter questions and it helps you ferret out who's the right expert to help you.
That's exactly right.
How is it similar or different on the HR side, leading the HR function?
Oh, that's a good point. I forgot that we were also going to talk about HR for a second. I thought it was just a legal podcast. I think the HR department or the side of things is very different from legal. I really do. I think that what has prepared me to do the HR job well is the intersection that legal and HR have at every company. I think legal sometimes or often does get involved in very hairy situations when it comes to HR. And those are the most difficult HR situations that I think help you learn. Those are like when you think about like when you're in your career of things where you learn the most, when things were really hard, where you didn't really know what was happening. You had to like apply everything that you had to that particular situation and things were difficult. And so the more complex the situation, the more you learn. And if it's, and it's always great to learn from simple things and build upon them. But when you get to that thing that is so complex, so difficult, so hard to wrap your head around, that's when I think, lawyers and just people in general just elevate their game. They take a step up and figure out, okay, this is, I'm going to challenge myself and this is challenging and I want to get it done. And so that's when I think law or lawyers get involved in HR situations. That's why typically when I was a GC or just a GC, I would handle executive employment agreements. That's why we get involved with equity, because equity can sometimes be complicated, especially at complicated, corporate structures for companies. And so lawyers kind of get involved with that because they're complicated. There's legal implications. And that's where I kind of learned a lot of it. But ultimately, I think on the HR side, I think what makes a successful chief people officer or chief human resources officers is really understanding people and trying to remember that the people that work at a company are not numbers on a spreadsheet. And I think that can really happen for large organizations when you are, every company might have to do a reduction in force. And you look at the names on a page and you look at the dollar signs that the company is going to save. And I think it's very easy when you're sitting in the executive room or executive office to say, well, we'll cut 10%. 10% is 10%. These are the dollars we save. And I think that you always have to remember of every HR decision you make that there's a person and a person's potential livelihood that is going to get affected by that decision. And I don't think it's good for HR people to hide behind, emails or just kind of like corporate speak. You really got to just reach out, pick up the phone and say, hey, Stephen, this is a difficult decision that we're making. Things are happening, and keep them informed. I think the biggest lesson on the HR side I've learned is that you treat people like people, you have a better culture. And if you treat people like they're cogs in a system, that's not a good culture to have at any company, which is very different from legal, right, Joe? I mean, that was a totally different kind of explanation of how to do a job than I think the GC job.
Well, it gives you the opportunity to really influence the culture. Is that
right.
what brought you to InStride?
Oh, that's a good point. So what brought me to InStride was I got headhunted. That's probably the short answer. So thank you, Spencer Stewart, for bringing me to InStride. But I think in terms of the opportunity itself, I think at the time I was really excited about the executive team. I was really excited about TPG. I think TPG is a great private equity fund, and they are the primary investor in InStride. I had not done private equity before. I'd done Zwift was a VC-backed company, and I do think that the legal and HR aspect of it was interesting in the beginning to get me through the door. I will tell you, Joe, and I know this is a GC podcast, so I'll watch what I say, but I do think that my current job is maybe 80% HR and 20% legal. The HR job is all consuming. The people and the needs of the InStride, of the employees it never ends. It never stops. There are times as a GC where like something happens, it keeps you up at night. We hear that phrase all the time. That would happen every once in a while. With HR, it could be every day. There's something that might keep you up with something related to HR or employment at the company that it's an everyday thing, and it just demands, I think, more of my time anyway.
Yeah. Wow. I was going to ask you how you manage the competing demands of, being a legal advisor, business partner, and a corporate leader.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that on the legal side, my main two functions, and I suspect that a lot of your GC guests say the same thing. My two main, I think, things that I can provide to the company on the legal side is one is I would say I'm a strategic advisor to the CEO. I think anything that the CEO is about to do or make a business decision, I like to think that I'm typically in the room and helping them decide whether it's a good idea or bad idea. I think that is one thing that I think I provide as a benefit to the CEO. And the second thing is I provide a second set of eyes and ears in the boardroom. That is, I think, something that not every other executive gets to do all the time because I'm in the boardroom from beginning to end, right? Almost every board interaction that the CEO has with the rest of the board, because our CEO is on the board, I see. And I think that position, which is a very, very special position that no GC should take for granted, means that you have the ability to provide counsel or advice, or as I said, a second set of eyes and ears, because any person, the CEO interacting with the board is going to be thinking like, should I say it this way? Should I say it a different way? How are they going to react if I position it this way? And I think it's very, very good. You're going to have a better relationship with your CEO if he's able to come to you and ask you those questions. And you want your CEO to ask you those questions because you want your CEO to trust that you know how to read a room, that you know how the business is interacting with the types of decisions that a board is going to make. And I think those are, at least on the legal side, those are the two main areas where I really put in a lot of time and effort. A lot of the other legal stuff, I would say, is really run by the deputy GC.
Got it. You talked about your number two in each of those areas. How do you cultivate a strong, high-performing team? And do you treat each of those as independent teams from your perspective, or do you manage them as one? How does that work?
You mean legal and HR combined versus...
Well, in all the areas that you manage.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And maybe I have a little bit of, and I don't know if my opinion or thought process on this is exactly right, but this is how I do it. I do silo them off. I do operate with, you are a legal team, you are an HR team, you are an IT security team. And it's easier that way because, as I mentioned earlier, that they kind of fall under one person. So that one person kind of like isn't the entire thing. I do bring them together for like cultural things. So when we're at an all company gathering or we're at a dinner, like we kind of all come together because these are all my people, and they're all shared service departments at the end of the day, right, Joe? So it's not like I'm mixing, a commercial team or a sales team with legal. These are all what I would say shared services for the entire company. Our clients at the end of the day are the entire rest of the company, and so there's a lot of synergies under what we call the administrative function at InStride. And how do I cultivate teams? So one little interesting metric, which I think when I look at a manager, especially when we hire executives, one of the questions that I typically ask or like to find out is, how many other people from your past life are you going to bring here, right? And that is a big, big sign as to whether or not you're a good manager or whether people like you or whether you're a jerk. Because if you are a jerk, then no one is going to come work for you. And I actually tell people, like, I've moved around a lot in my career. If you look at my resume, I can't hold down a job to save my life for longer than 4 years, Joe. And I move around, and I often tell people, like, when I move on, the question that I want to be able to answer is not when I move on and join a new company. If I ask you, will you come with me? That's not the question. The question is, if I ask you, will you say yes? Right? And there's a real big difference. Like, me asking someone to come join me is irrelevant. It only matters if I ask and then they actually want to come. And so currently, of the 20 people that report to me at InStride, 5 of them came from a prior life. So 5 of them actually came from Zwift at some point in the past. And so 2 of my 3 legal team members, not including myself, came from Zwift. And there are 2 on the HR team and 1 who actually transitioned to a different part of the company, which is great mobility, also came from Zwift. And so I do, when it comes to cultivating a team, I like to be the type of manager that can, at the end of the day, if I move on in a year or two, that if I come and ask them, will you come with me? They'll be willing to say yes. I think it's a certain style. I think it causes me to be a nice guy, Joe. I think there's a nice balance of like nice guy. I don't want to burn a bridge. I don't want to be too hard on them. I want to create this very, very collegial environment. That's just the type of leader I am. But there are really great GCs and really good leaders out there that I've met, Joe, that I think are very hard on their people. And they believe by challenging them, making them grow, pushing them to the absolute limit, in the end, that's why they'll thank them. And that's why they'll want to join them and go with them. And I think it's a different philosophy. It's like a philosophy I didn't think about, but I probably am more on the nice guy side than the push them to the limit side.
Well, know thyself and be who you are. I think don't try to be somebody else, right?
Yeah.
That's great. What are you looking forward to?
I'll try to say this without sharing too much confidentiality of my current company. I'm looking forward to an exit. I really want to take a company to some kind of exit. It doesn't have to be an IPO. I'm more than happy to sell a company. I just haven't done any of those things as a GC yet. And I really want to experience what that process looks like. That would be a huge number one goal for me in terms of like, and I do think that as for GCs and what you have, like your feather in your cap, or so to speak, having that type of exit or any, is good for us, right? And it shows the market, it shows future employers, it shows recruiters that, this person has gone through this kind of phase or this type of transaction. I think I have certain other things, like I've done multi-million-dollar M&A, so I think that kind of checks that box. I've been in the boardroom for a long time, but the thing I haven't done is kind of exit a company, and I look forward to trying to do that because that's just an experience that I've never had. Another thing I really look forward to, which is not in my current role, but I would really look forward to just doing something more internationally again. We kind of alluded to that a little bit back when we were talking about CBRE and that experience. But when you're in startup world, especially when they're relatively small and US based, they don't always have global operations. And so I haven't had the opportunity to get out internationally. And that's something I want to do. I don't know if your listeners care about that at all, but that's more for Stephen Chu.
Great. Well, I like to wrap things up by asking, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be? Now, you're quite young, so
trust me, there's probably a lot of advice I could give to my younger self. That's for sure. I'm trying to think. That is a good question. I have a philosophy in life that I try to live with no regrets. And so I look back on all of the various decisions that I've made in my career, and I try to think that each one was for the right reason and that it put me on the path that I am on now. And that path is something I'm very happy about. I think that I would probably say don't change anything. But at the same time, I'd probably tell my younger self to be, and you and I should talk about this later, Joe, because you might laugh about what I'm about to say, which is be patient. And I think that I think you and I both became general counsels at a young age, but I probably would have told my 25 to 33-year-old self that it will happen eventually. That you don't need to, and again, that's why I jumped around a lot, is because I was probably being impatient and I was trying to look for the next big thing. And it's no surprise that other people call me impatient, especially when I'm trying to getting that itch and I want to do something else. And I think that I would probably tell myself as much as possible to be patient. It's not the end of the, I don't think it's a grass is always greener thing, but I don't think it's going to be the end of the world if this opportunity doesn't come exactly at the time that I need it to come or want it to come. And I'd probably tell them to be more patient.
Well, it's a brilliant answer. And not just because my answer to that question is very similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think that's the best advice I give. And I think hopefully younger Stephen might make different decisions based on that advice.
Well, Stephen, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. We can't wait to see what you're going to do next.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our time with Stephen. I know I did. 3 key things I'll take from this episode include: taking on more than one role means you need to have key lieutenants in all the areas under your responsibility. You can't try to be the hands-on person in each of the areas. You have to hire great people and manage them with trust. Number 2, working in a large company law department is helpful in your development into a GC, particularly if you take advantage of the opportunity to get a broad range of experience in multiple roles like Stephen did at CBRE. It reminds me of my first in-house role at Baxter Healthcare when we had the opportunity to move around. And I remember counting something like 5 or 6 of us, maybe even more, who went on from there to become public company GCs in just a 1 or 2 year period. And 3, it really helps to build relationships that transcend companies, and consider following your key mentors as they step into bigger roles. And then later, as you step into new roles, building relationships so that you have the opportunity to bring people along with you who you trust to support you. Okay, until next time, this is Joe Scholl. For more tips on accelerating your path to becoming a world-class general counsel, visit InSideCounselAcademy.com and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming the GC. Whether you're preparing for the GC role or looking to sharpen your skills as a sitting general counsel, we hope this episode offered valuable insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Explore more resources and join our community at InSideCounselAcademy.com. Please tune in next time for more insights and inspiring stories from successful legal leaders.